In a significant move to address Nigeria's budgetary challenges, President Bola Tinubu has formally requested the National Assembly's approval for a new external borrowing plan amounting to about 1.767 trillion naira as part of the 2024 Appropriation Act. Now, this request, which was presented during a plenary session on Tuesday, aims to partially finance the country's 9.7 trillion naira budget deficit for the upcoming fiscal year. Now, alongside this borrowing proposal, the President has also submitted the Medium Term Expenditure Framework and Fiscal Strategy Paper for the 2025-2027 season, as well as an amendment bill for the National Social Investment Program. This morning in our studios, I have Segun Sopitan, Principal Partner, Woodridge and Scott Consulting. Thank you so much, Segun, for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, government apologetics say there is nothing bad if Nigeria continues to borrow to fund its expenditure. Judging by past borrowings, where Nigeria is now, in terms of its debt portfolio, which is over 120 trillion naira, there's a possibility to be skyrocketing to over 130 trillion naira. And looking at the budget deficit, is it still okay to continue to request for loans?
I mean, look, we have to do something differently. That's the message that I've been, trying to push as often as, I've had the opportunity. We've got to do something different. It's not working. We've accumulated a debt profile right now of over 100, and like you've said, between 120 to 138 trillion, depending on which report you're looking at. And with the deficit that is embedded in the 2025 budget proposal that we've seen, we're talking potentially 150 trillion naira. I mean, those numbers are mind-boggling. And you look around you and you ask yourself, where's the money? Where's the 150 trillion naira worth of value that has been generated or created by these loans? So like you said, some people might argue that there's nothing wrong with borrowing. Everybody borrows. In fact, other people's money funds the biggest businesses in the world. All governments across the world, the biggest economies across the world have huge debt overhang, sometimes in multiples of their GDP. But you look around yourself in those places, you can point very easily to, the developmental outcomes,
changes,
of the borrowing. And in Nigeria, you really can't say the same. Our infrastructure is exactly where it's been. It's a dead flat. Electricity has remained at roughly about 5,000 megawatts in distribution capacity for all the 24, 25 years of this democracy. Power generation has not changed. Road infrastructure has not improved. The airways, the seaports, nothing. So where's the money? The healthcare sector, where's the money? So for me, it's not so much the borrowing. We do have to do something about the borrowing, but it's that we cannot see the commensurate value and productivity that is supposed to follow this borrowing, and that's a big problem.
And we still hear that, when you look at Nigeria's debt portfolio, it's not as high compared to other countries that have borrowed. But then we are talking about external borrowing, and we know what the dollar to the naira is now, over 1,700. Is the Nigerian government thinking about all the things that you have talked about, as regards, the impact that it's already having on the debt-to-GDP ratio, which recently exceeded 50%, and even the implication of that on the debt and fiscal sustainability of the country?
Well, I mean, look, the United States is running at about 110% debt to GDP. Japan sometimes hits 200%. So the government is going to argue and say, 50% we're doing well, right? So I think that the debt to GDP ratio can be very deceptive. We should look at revenue, debt service obligation to revenue generation of the country, and that presents a completely different picture. Even though this government celebrated as a sign of positive outcomes the fact that that ratio has dropped to 65% from an all-time high of over 100% at some point last year, 65% of your total revenues to service debt is atrocious. You know, where would you then get the money to pay your bills? First of all, your overheads and your salaries, before you start talking about developmental spending. So what that means, the 65% debt service obligation to revenue ratio, what that means is that we're going to have to continue to borrow, to continue, and we're in a trap. So what that automatically says to anybody that has any small financial sense is you have to stop borrowing. You've got to stop. You've got to now begin to look for solutions. How can I fund my activities? How do I fund developmental projects? How do I fund, even your recurrent expenditure and all of that outside of borrowing? How do I increase my revenue profile? How do I bring private investment and private capital into government spending? Those are the questions we need to start asking ourselves. We have to stop the borrowing spree.
One thing that you mentioned earlier was the fact that when you look at other countries that have borrowed, you see that commensurate development in terms of infrastructural development, even the economy becomes buoyant. That actually happened in Argentina. That before Milei came into power, that's the president. The country was running into almost into financial default, into debt distress, and austerity measures were put in place, and we saw the changes. Of course, we know that there are peculiarities when you consider Nigeria, maybe some other African countries. But then you look at the federal and the subnationals in terms of their borrowing portfolio and to the areas whereby these funds have been expended, and we don't see that change. At what point do we begin to critique the spendings of government that would actually, help us understand what developmental projects are there that the government is actually expending these funds into, that probably we can now start tracking, maybe in the next 2-3 years. We begin to say, okay, so X amount of monies were borrowed. They've been invested into so projects, and now we are beginning to see the yields and the dividends. When are we going to get to that point?
I guess the answer to that is more of a civil society thing. I think that Nigerians at some point have got to understand that if you don't ask questions, answers will not be provided. I don't know of any government anywhere in the world that just provides reports, stays accountable, stays financially responsible just because they want to. They do those things because, first of all, the provisions of their laws specify or stipulate that they must. And secondly, because if they don't, they are afraid of the backlash from the people. So I think the answer to that question is that Nigerians have to begin to ask the questions. Look, in the last 15 years or thereabouts, I can count on the fingers of maybe my two hands the marquee projects that you can point to and say this is a significant infrastructure project that has hit the ground and impacted the lives of people. I can count, the second Niger Bridge, Lagos-Ibadan Expressway that was finished under the Buhari administration, the Lagos-Ibadan rail line, the Kaduna-Abuja rail line. If you want to be magnanimous, you can talk about the Itakpe-Warri rail line, and that's about it. That's about it. I can't think of any other one.
What about the 15 trillion coastal highway? It seems the president has actually ratified that.
Yeah, but it's still at the beginning stages. I'm talking about the projects that have been finished completed, and that the economy is now benefiting from. How is it that I can only mention 5 off the top of my head? It shouldn't be. There should be so many that I won't dare to attempt to list them out. And that is the problem. So the money seems to just disappear. So what that does is you don't get the commensurate productivity and economic growth and development that is supposed to follow that money, which will then drive the revenues that you will use to pay them back. So there's a huge accountability question that has to be answered around all of this.
Okay, so we're going to be very critical about this now. With Nigeria's foreign debt servicing costs rising by 39.77 trillion, 39.77% rather, to about $3.58 billion in 2024, and external debt climbing to about $42.9 billion amid naira volatility, as I mentioned earlier. Now, is this government not risking a debt trap by this continuous increase in borrowing?
We are in a debt trap already. That number that you quoted, when you project it to the end of a full year, we will be spending about $5.2 billion United States dollars to service our debt obligations. $5.2 billion. That's several trillions of naira just to service debt obligation. And what that means is that in order for you to do other things, you have to borrow. So yeah, we're in a debt trap already. We have to think outside the box to get ourselves out of this debt trap. We need a government that will be brave, courageous, and say we will no longer follow, the templates of the Bretton Woods institutions. The IMF and the World Bank, they encourage you to borrow. They'll tell you that, you know, your GDP to debt ratio, the debt to GDP ratio is still healthy. You can borrow. You need to just meet these particular conditions, you know, accountability conditions and all that. They are always throwing the monies at us. We have to say no to those monies. The president has to say no. The president has to assemble a team. We have brilliant minds. I keep saying this in this country. Brilliant business minds, economic minds that have excelled.
The presidential economic team is not brilliant enough.
No, they've got fantastic guys there. So where is the output from that brilliance? You know, we need to see that rubber touch the tarmac so that we can move forward as a country. We're not seeing enough of the intellectual rigor in what we're doing. It seems as if there's just this template. Every time we have a project to fund, let's just go to the World Bank, let's just go to IMF. They will tell you, meet this condition, meet that condition, you meet it, and then you get the money. Where's the intellectual rigor? So that's what I'm talking about. We need to bring people together deliberately, and the president needs to charge them. Find funding sources for me outside of external borrowing. The money is there. Are we ready to do the things that, you know, that needs to be done?
Okay, so you talked about, you know, the bravery of government. Let's even look at that on the part of the legislative arm. I mean, there are meant to be checks and balances when it comes to actions of these arms of government. One of the lawmakers a few days ago came out, you know, on TV to say that he supports these borrowings, like he's literally backing sort of these borrowings. So when we continue to see the legislative arm appear as though as a rubber stamp and not really querying these kind of requests, loan requests, where they will be expended, what they will be used for, how it's going to transform or change the critical sectors of the economy, what does that tell you?
It tells us we're in trouble because you know, the legislative arm are supposed to, like you said, are supposed to be the checks and balances. Now, it's understandable if you have a legislature that is composed significantly of legislators from the ruling party, you know, so they would want to cooperate with the executive to as much of a degree as they can. And we do know that what we have on our hands is a Senate that is, you know, that will never question the president. They support everything the president brings on board. But the question for me is, where are the opposition legislators? Where are the PDP legislators? Where are the Labour Party legislators? We've still got a large enough number of legislators from the opposition whose voices have just gone silent. And, you know, I mean, the politics of that, I would rather not go into it, but it's not a pretty picture, and there is no democracy that can work where checks and balances and accountability structures are not functioning. And, you know, it's no surprise, therefore, that we are not seeing the dividends of democracy and we're not getting good governance in Nigeria as we speak. And despite the fact that, you know, fuel subsidy has removed, even the Nigerian government has come out to say that it has stopped fuel imports. Certain trillions of naira will be saved. One would expect that borrowings, if not totally eradicated, would be reduced. But then here we are again. Segun Sopitan, principal partner, Woodridge Scott Consulting. Thank you so much for your time on the show. Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.